A woman with a really hairy underarms boards a crowded bus. Unable to find a seat, she settles for hanging onto one of the poles. A drunk man next to her stares at her for 3 minutes, then tells her, "I love a woman who does aerobics." The woman replies angrily, "I don't do aerobics." The drunk man then looks at the woman and says, "Then how did you get your leg up so high?" Guy has been asking the prettiest girl in town for a date, and finally she agrees to go out with him. He takes her to a nice restaurant and buys her the gourmet dinner with expensive wine. On the way home, he pulls over to the side of the road in a secluded spot. They start making and he's getting pretty excited. He starts to reach under her skirt and she stops him, saying she's a virgin and wants to stay that way. "Well, okay," he says. "How about a blow?" "Yuck," she screams. "I'm not putting that thing in my mouth." He says, "Well, then how about a hand?" "I've never done that," she says. "What do I have to do?" "Well," he answers, "remember when you were a kid and you used to shake up a Coke bottle and spray your brother with it?" She nods. "Well, it's just like that." So he pulls it out and she grabs hold of it and starts shaking it. A few seconds later, his head flops back on the hardest. His eyes close. Snot starts to run out of his nose. Wax blows out of his ear and he screams out in pain. "What's wrong?" she cries out. "Take your thumb off the end." After 40 years as a gynecologist, John decided he had enough money to retire and take up his real love, car mechanics. He left his practice, enrolled in a car mechanics class, and studied hard. The day of the final exam came and John worried if he would be able to complete the test with the same proficiency as his younger classmates. Most of the students completed their exam in 2 hours. John, on the other hand, took the entire 4 hours allotted. The following day, John was delighted and surprised to see a score of 150% for his exam. John spoke to his teacher after class. "I never dreamed I could do this well on the exam. How did I earn a score of 150%? The teacher replied, "I gave you 50% for perfectly deassembling the car engine. I awarded another 50% for perfectly reassembling the engine. I gave you an additional 50% for having done all of it through the exhaust pipe." After just a few years of marriage filled with constant arguments, a young couple and his wife decided the only way to save the marriage was to try counseling. They had been at each other's throats for some time and felt that this was their last chance. When they arrived at the counselor's office, the counselor jumped right in and opened the floor for discussion. "What seems to be the problem?" Immediately, the husband held his long face down without anything to say. On the other hand, the wife began talking 100 miles an hour, describing all the wrong things within their marriage. After 5, then 10, then 15 minutes of listening to the wife, the counselor went over to her, picked her up by the shoulders, kissed her passionately for several minutes, and sat her back down. The wife sat there speechless. He looked over at the husband, who was staring in disbelief at what had happened. The counselor spoke to the husband. "Your wife needs that at least twice a week." The husband scratched his head and replied, "I can have her here on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Little boy goes to his dad and asks, "What is politics?" Dad says, "Well, son, let me try to explain it this way. I'm the breadwinner of the family, so let's call me capitalism. Your mom, she's the administrator of the money, so we'll call her the government. We are here to take care of your needs, so we'll call you the people. The nanny, will consider her the working class. And your baby brother, We will call him the future. Now think about that and see if that makes sense. So the little boy goes off to bed thinking about what Dad has said. Later that night, he hears his baby brother crying. So he gets up to check on him. He finds that the baby has dirtied his diaper. So the little boy goes to his parents' room and finds his mother sound asleep. Not wanting to wake her, he goes to the nanny's room. Finding the door locked, he peeks in the keyhole and sees his father in bed with the nanny. He gives up and goes back to bed. The next morning, the little boy says to his father, "Dad, I think I understand the concept of politics now." The father says, "Good son, tell me in your own words what you think politics is all about." The little boy replies, "Well, while capitalism is screwing the working class, the government is sound asleep, the people are being ignored, and the future is in deep shit." Tony had been feeling guilty all day long. No matter how much he tried to forget about it, he couldn't. The guilt and sense of shame was overwhelming. But every once in a while, he'd hear that soothing voice trying to reassure him. "Tony, don't worry about it. You're not the first surgeon to sleep with one of your patients, and you won't be the last. And you're single. So just let it go." But invariably, the other voice would bring him back to reality. "Tony, you're a vet surgeon." Couple were having trouble conceiving a child, so they went to a doctor. He examined them and concluded that the problem was one of insufficient penetration. He suggested to the man that they try the rear entry position. The man said, "What is that?" The doctor replied, "Just watch the dogs and do like they do." The man said, "My wife is very shy, and she won't do that." The doctor replied, "Try giving her a glass of wine or two, and she will lose all inhibition." Some while later, the doctor met the man pushing a stroller. "I see it worked," the doctor said. "Yes, it did, doc. But now the problem is my wife is an alcoholic." "How did that happen?" the doctor asked. "Well, every time we did it, it took 7 or 8 drinks just to get her out into the front garden."